Well, good evening. No. Yeah, okay. No, I want to hear a rousing good evening. That's a lot better. Hello. How are we all doing tonight? See a lot of great smiles, see some old faces, some new faces. My name is Bruce Cohen. I am the current board president for Festival Awards. And in a second, I'm going to introduce our executive director. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight for our kickoff for the 11th annual 2018 Festival of Words. "11 years, all conceived by this fantastic brainchild of a person, Patrice Melnick. And now we're going strong, our 11th year. It's fantastic. Some great events are coming your way this evening. And tomorrow, if you don't have a folder, there are flyers available. I have some I can pass out for all the schedule of events. We're just jam-packed with events for tomorrow. And we have, this year, we have 3 incredibly diverse authors to present their works and their creativity to you. So I'm really looking forward to all of that. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our current executive director, Martha Garner.
Hi, I actually took over this position last January, but I haven't really felt like the executive director until the last few weeks when things started coming together. And I am referring to myself as the sorcerer's apprentice because Patrice has been helping me so much to figure everything out. Festival of Words is all about the literary arts. We want to do outreach in the schools and in the community, and we want to encourage creative expression. That's been our mission from the first day, and we're still going strong with that mission. We also have artists in schools. You have some teaching artists that work for us, and the artists who come every year to present at Chicory's and to teach workshops also teach in the schools in St. Landry Parish. We want to thank Chicory's, of course, for hosting us again this year. And be sure to get something delicious to eat or drink here. Let me see. If you're on the board of directors, can you raise your hand? I'm not sure too many of us are here tonight. Just 3? No, Andy, 4. And do we have any volunteers here tonight? I'm thinking, no? Bruce. I would also like to point out that Missy Coig from Conundrum Books in St. Francisville has brought a lovely assortment of books for you to look through and purchase. And we're very honored tonight to have our introductory speech made by Patrick Jenkins, who is St. Landry Parish School Superintendent, and he is a huge supporter of the arts, which is also delightful to us.
Well, good evening. Good evening. All right, well, it's exciting to be here. And I'd just like to say that as I was introduced about being a supporter of the arts, I believe that the arts are critical to all children in St. Landry Parish and throughout the world. I mean, it makes whole children. And we want to definitely continue to partner with Festival of Words currently and into the future, and we're going to continue to do that. I had the opportunity recently to go to the Governor's Mansion. There was a luncheon by the First Lady there, and in recognition of the arts. And so that was exciting to participate in that. Also, we had an opportunity to work this year with the Acadiana Center for the Arts to enhance the arts programs throughout St. Landry Parish schools. And so all of our schools are participating through this partnership. And so I'm excited about it and just the opportunity for growth in the future. So, you know, keep doing what you're doing. It's exciting to be here. And I also would like to thank you for all of the students that you've touched with having them an opportunity to participate in the spoken word. We had 3 students from Kington to win first, second, and third place. So that was exciting. So before I go, since this is an opportunity for spoken word, I want to speak a little bit. So I have, so this is one of my new favorites. I have a lot of favorites, but it's called On Children by Khalil Gilbrand. Since I'm an educator, I want to talk about children. It reads, your children are not your children. They're the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, for life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrow may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves, the arrow flies, and so he loves also the bow that is stable. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to Martha. And to our wonderful superintendent of St. Landry Parish. You are absolutely right, sir. The arts complete the whole person. And it's integral as much as math, science, and English for every child to have an opportunity to be creative and to find their creative self in some sense. So thank you for your support. We really appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to start with our featured authors to present to you tonight, and we're going to start with the poet laureate of the state, current poet laureate of the state of Louisiana, Jack Bedell. So to do Jack's intro, we have a student who participated in a workshop today. Who was that workshop led by? That's right, and that's who you're going to introduce. See how that all works, synchronicity? So at this time, I want to bring to the mic Tyree Annie Phillips. Or, no, tell me again. Tyriani Phillips.
Good evening. Jack Bedell is currently serving as the Poet Laureate of Louisiana. Dr. Bedell is a professor of English in Southeastern Louisiana University and the author of 9 books, including Call and Response with Darrell Bourke of 2010, Come Rain, Come Shine of 2006, What Passes for Love of 2001, Bone Hollow, True New, and Selected Poems of 2013, Elected of 2016, and Revenant of 2016. Please help me welcome Jack Bedell.
If it falls, though, I'm going to run. That's what I was taught. When anything breaks, run. So, thank you, Tariana. She's being very modest and I think Ms. Cortez can back me up on that, she ran that workshop today. So she made that workshop today. We talked about poetry, and it was maybe a little tough getting the voices to rise to a good volume and she led the way. So thank you very much for doing that today. And I appreciate being introduced as a poet laureate, but my poet laureate's sitting in the back of this room, Daryl Bork. So. Yeah. And thank y'all for having me. I've had so much fun already that, and I'm really looking forward to sitting in the audience because you are going to be treated to some beautiful music, some great musicianship, and a couple of good writers that are the best we could possibly have tonight. So I'm going to do my best to abridge some of this so I can be with y'all. I thought I'd read a few poems from a brand new book, and one thing I've learned over the years is I would think, being from Houma, that our cultures are pretty similar, that we share a common bond in our language and in a lot of how we raise ourselves. But there are a couple of things I need to probably define, because Daryl's taught me in the past that all the words we used weren't the words that made it this way, this far west in the state on the coast. So this first poem is a poem about my mother. These poems, this book, No Brother the Storm, started as a book about coastal erosion and a little bit loss of coastline and the efforts we're doing to restore that coastline. And as I was getting into writing those poems that appeared in a book by J. Bruce Fuller with a local press, Yellow Flag, called Elliptic, I lost my mother. And I could not separate those subjects, and the kind of loss took over. One of the blessings, though, is that I'm not a big dreamer, but I have dreams about my mom now, which I never did when she was living. And I always wake up feeling like I've had a really nice visit from those dreams. And that's what this poem's about. And the only thing I probably need to say ahead of time is that I mentioned in the first stanza chick buns. And I just learned last year that y'all don't eat chick buns over here, and you don't make them. Chick de femme buns, they're really yellow, have twice as many yolks in them, but they're just sweet bun. Like, not cinnamon roll, just like a sweet bun. So that when that shows up, you know what I'm talking about. It's called Remnant. They happen in the kitchen, these visits with my mother. She's always working, something busy like separating yolks for chick buns. Alive, she would have passed the eggs through her fingers, letting the whites drip through, holding the yolks gently in her palm. During these dreams, though, she uses the shells like they do on cooking shows, passing the yolks from half to half before dropping them into the mixing bowl. She makes her dough patiently, without much fuss, pressing it out and balling it up quietly in the hollow of an old balsa plank. When the dough is gold and dense enough, she raises the plank as high as she can above her head to place it in the warm spot on top of the refrigerator. Straining like this, she is so much like herself I can barely breathe. If I try to help her or open my mouth to speak, the alarm goes off and morning will burn itself onto the day. Quiet or not, I can never stay long enough for the dough to rise, for her to roll and cut the buns, place them in the oven on buttered sheets. Even though I'll wake before the smell hits me, the taste remains. This is a poem I wrote for my daughter. She's kind of taken over the poems lately. She's 10, and my sons are really happy that she's dominating the poems these days because they're about tired of me writing about them. And y'all will get this. When this might be the first place that I say this line and somebody gets it, I make a mention of the difference between crapaud and wawadon. And everywhere else I read, nobody knows what either one of those things is. So this is going to be fun. It's called First Kiss. I cannot keep my daughter's mind off baby frogs. My father caught one for her the other day and put it in the hollow of her palm. She fell for its smooth green skin and shiny eyes, loved how it held her fingertips in its tiny hands. Now she's a huntress. As soon as the coffee pot goes off in the morning, she's dressed and staring out the back door glass. She waits on point until I release the bolt, setting her to motion. There's no distracting her with linguistics, the difference between crapaud and wawadon. She wants to turn over every pot, pull back the cover of the barbecue pit, check each slat in the storm shutters. She knows no crack is too small for these frogs. They can flatten themselves and get under anything. They fold their bones and wait for her, each one a prince. I don't know if this is going to sound like I mean it, but I had one of the best conversations I've ever had in my life last night about killing animals with Cedric. And it was much funnier than that sounds. So I thought I would, my dad's first job when he married my mom, he hadn't gotten a job in the oil field yet, so he got a job minding a chicken farm, minding a chicken coop, a big farm, not just a coop. And because he didn't know anything about chickens, his job was on hot days to go in the barn, go in the coop and chase the chickens out. Because if y'all know chickens, you know that they like to clump together in the heat, and so they'll die, and then they're no good to anybody. So that was his first job, and he always told me the story anytime I complained about what I was doing at work. First he laughed when I complained about my job, and then he told me this story. So it's called Parabolic. His first summer married, my father tended chickens. His job was to chase the birds out of the tin coop on hot days. They piled on top of each other in the corner of the shed, no matter how hot it got in there. He had to fight his way through their bodies until he reached the back wall. Unless he could tease the deepest chickens in the coop to shuffle back out in the sunlight, none of the other birds would leave. Whenever he grabbed the ones pressed against the wall and threw them towards the door, they'd run back to press themselves into the flock again. The only way to save the birds was to make them choose the outside air for themselves. If he couldn't, the whole dirt floor would be piled with white dead feathers. Too many bodies even for the workers to carry home to their wives for supper. Because we ate the dead chickens. Good. Poem I wrote for my wife. It's called A Wedding in Rain. She dragged me to a wedding for somebody we didn't even know. And it rained. And they had about a 12-year-old preacher. And he was intent on ruining everybody's day. And so this might be the quickest poem I ever wrote. On the way home, I wrote this poem from that. But I really enjoyed the day. It's called A Wedding in Rain. It's good luck, the rain, my wife says to the stranger behind us. If I was any luckier, the man smiles back, they'd put me in jail then. And the young preacher starts talking about hard times and about how people are worse more than they are better. And the young couple cares nothing about sermons or luck or how the raindrops fall straight through the giant oak reaching out over their heads. They just hold hands and look into each other's eyes and see the person they know is right there with them, not the flawed sinner the young preacher keeps telling them they'll wake up to tomorrow. And the old people daubing rain off their glasses, they know the walk back up to the reception hall won't be nearly as kind, uphill and slick after this little blessing of luck. But for right now, there's song and prayer and promises, and more than 2 people happy to be here, wet. Thought I'd read some of those first poems. We had a bad flood. We had 2 actually, 2 years ago in Hammond, and I probably brought it on us because the first thing I heard when we heard that the Tangipahoa River was flooding, I live 1.5 miles from the river, so I said, well, that's not getting to me. And then I watched that river crawl into my backyard, and it got to about 2 feet from my back door. And it made me really realize how much loss that involved, like how many people were hurt by that. If it got to me from 1.5 miles away, there were some people who really suffered from it. And the crazy thing is, other than all the junk it left in my yard, it left a snapping turtle. And I wrote a poem about it. My kids had never seen a snapping turtle, and then I felt guilty because I'd never shown my kids a snapping turtle. So. And I was like, well, go out in the yard and fool with it. And my wife was like, no. So instead, they get to read this poem about it. It's called Dark Current. Just a little poem. Stranded in our yard by backwash of river and a foot of rain, a snapping turtle rolls on its shell, perpetual as if fallen in a dream. Its claws cannot find river bottom for purchase, and nothing in this sea foam of leaves gathering around its body can satisfy its chomping jaws. No wind to carry it where it must go. No light bright enough to dry this mess. No brother this storm. And this is the title poem. And one thing when I was writing about this coastal erosion, I caught myself, and all I was doing was inventorying what we were losing. And it started because my brother had sent me a text. He doesn't really text words, he just texts pictures. And he texted me a picture of open water, just open water. And so I wrote back, where is that? And he said, that's at the base of Bayou Decad. That's where we had a family camp growing up, and there was land everywhere. And now it's just ocean. It's open water. And that hit home. It changed it for me because I didn't want to just inventory, and this is true because I lost my mom. I didn't just want to inventory what we lost. I wanted to find stories I could tell about accepting that and appreciating it, but moving forward. Because life is, in my mind, life is beautiful whenever you have it. And we have to move forward. We can't, if we sit around, like they say, you don't look back because you're not going that direction. So I wanted to write poems even about coastal, about losing our marsh and losing our coast, about where we're going to help, where can we go? And this was probably the first poem, Elliptic, that I was able to write where I could kind of see, I don't know if I get it in the poem, but I could kind of see where we were going to go. We were going to have to come up with a way to do this, and the way we were trying to deal with it's not helping. So it's just a really brief poem, and it's really about thinking about Bayou Sauvage, which is in southeast Louisiana, where they're doing, you've probably seen footage of it, they're dumping Christmas trees every January, and it really is making a difference. It sounded like a scam when I heard about it the first time. It sounded like somebody's brother-in-law needed some money. Somebody's brother-in-law who happened to own a helicopter, but it was working. I mean, I've seen it myself. The wildlife's returning, the shrimp's returning. So this meant to kind of start appreciating that. It's called Elliptic. Lines of reeds where land releases the Gulf, backwash into salt and wave. If we were to lay our dead here to guard this shore against new storms, we could not pile bones quickly enough to outpace this loss, would never stave off such constant leaving. I wish I could show y'all how much of the poem I took a lot of what I was trying to say, I took off the page and left holes. And it was a good step for me to do that, because then I was able to move forward and try to find some way of finding the good in that. Here's a poem following that up. It's called Breakwater. It's not recovery, no way to lure coastline back into place, recall silt already gone to Gulf. It's more like conception, as helicopters lift piles of Christmas trees into air, drop them in bundles along the marsh line. Reeds will grow in soil trapped here. Shrimp will hide as these ponds fill in. Ducks will land in flocks to feed. All new gifts against the water's need. I make faces when I see stuff I should have fixed, so I'm sorry about that. So when I got to the end of that one, I was like, your grammar's not right on that, I don't think. So, I also wanted to write, and I don't do well at this, but I wanted to write, instead of just what I saw or heard, I wanted to write about being in the marsh and feelings, how it makes me feel. And I know some of y'all if you've been outside and you hear a noise that's not natural, and you get frisson, and you get you just get a bad feeling about it. I wanted to write about that's a feeling. It's not about knowing anything. It's about feeling what it is. And that's where this poem, Frisson, came from. And I'm a little ashamed, but not really, to admit it's about Bigfoot. Frisson. Sometimes a yawp comes from the marsh. It echoes over the trees and stirs turtles from their posts atop cypress logs. Do not look for a bruise in the sky or some vacuum of light sucking from that direction. The hair will rise a certain way on the back of your neck and forearms. Follow these omens like compass needles leading you any other place. A couple more out of this, and I'll read some new poems, and then I'm going to sit down and clap. Mention my mom. I don't think my mom had it in us had it in her to hurt us. Now, if we did something, that's different, because that's like, this is what you get. But that's not hurting us. I mean, hurting is a voluntary act. It was involuntary if we broke something. But whenever she had to do something, I'll give you an example. This poem is about, I carried a bottle. They had to take it away from me when I got on the bus for first grade. I drank Coke out of a baby bottle. And so when I got home from school my first day, it was gone. And like everything that went missing, she told me the bears took it. And so she blamed anything that turned up missing, like if you had an old torn up shirt that she couldn't get you to take off, or a book that was falling apart but you kept carrying it around, or a fish head that you wouldn't let go of and it was smelling the house up, and the bears always came for that stuff. So this is a poem about that. It's called Raconte, which y'all know is to tell. Raconte. Whenever anything I cared about went missing, my mother told me the story of bears who struggled every day to find the things they needed. They had no home and moved around without rest under moonlight. She said they could cover hundreds of miles before sunrise. There was never any logic to the things the bears took, Mother told me. Even they didn't know what sparkly thing or noisemaker or special picture book they had to have until they held it in their huge paws and caught it shine in their eyes. My kids don't fall for the bears. I tried it. That was the first time I had to take a Noopy away from somebody. I tried the bears, took the Noopy. Ain't no bears, Dad, give my Noopy back. So, I don't think that's because my kids are smarter than I am. Maybe I'm just not as good a storyteller as my mom was. So, the poems in the last part of this new book, I don't really like being lesson-oriented or being really kind of editorial in my poems. I just like to let them play. I was always taught to let them play like a record. Let your poems play. Just put them on, and people will enjoy them or not. But I had written kind of a handful of poems, half a dozen poems, that kind of lean toward fable and moral. And this is one of those. Now, I'm not sure what the moral is, but it leaned toward lessons and symbols and things like that. And I was uncomfortable mixing that in with the rest of the poems because I didn't want anybody to mistake the rest of the poems for that. So I wanted to kind of put them in their own room. And there's a whole section of them. And this one's called Fable un Matin. And y'all probably heard this story. In North Louisiana, they had a cattle farmer that went back on his field and saw a 15-foot alligator in his pond out of nowhere, and made me wonder, how did that alligator get to North Louisiana? And instead of calling the state wildlife and fisheries like you're supposed to do, he just shot the thing, dragged it out of there with his truck and took a picture with it. So I figured Let's see if we can do a little better for the gator than that. So that's what this one is, Fable un matin. As soon as the eyes and snout showed up floating in his cattle pond one morning, the farmer began to count the stock roaming his fields. He'd never taken inventory before, but thought his numbers smaller than they ought to be. He set about watching the alligator swim around his pond that day, knowing it wouldn't leave as quickly as it had appeared. He told his children bedtime stories of wise gators who outwitted raccoons and bullfrog, read in wildlife books how long it took for them to grow past 15 feet, how gentle and patient they were courting love, always circling and waiting, slapping their broad throats on the water's surface for attention. But Fables could not save his calves, nosing grass at the water's edge, nor spare the white chickens pecking head down along the bank. His ledger was not difficult to balance. He had no meat to lose heading toward winter, and plenty 12-gauge shells back at the house, the walk too short to break much of a sweat. Just close with a few new ones. These still have fresh poem smell, so this is new poem smell on these. A couple about John Coltrane. You ever seen John Coltrane's tone circle? Yeah. The drawing? I spent a month staring at that, trying to figure out what his connections. The tone circle I understand. Even though I was a percussionist, we had to learn circle of fourths and fifths on marimba. We had to do all that. But I didn't understand how he drew. I've read articles about how it was trying to incorporate Eastern tonality into, but I stared at it because on this circle of tones and how tones relate to each other, he drew these circles around certain tones, and there's no really, unless you talk to the man, there was no logic of understanding what he saw that we didn't, or what he heard that we didn't. And with all the kind of ugliness that we see on the news every night, that was happening while I was studying this graphic, this poem came out. It's called Neighbor Tones. And I should probably define that. A neighbor tone is a tone that to our ear might sound discordant, but there's a ton of relationship in the frequencies of the two tones. So there is a relationship, it just, our ears don't, we hear it as out of tune sometimes in the West. In the East, they're happy with that. Half steps, fine. But we hear need for tuning kind of thing. And so this poem's Neighbor Tones, and I open up with a quote from Coltrane. All a musician can do is get closer to the sources of nature, and so feel that he is in communion with the natural laws. In Coltrane's circle, all tone shares a common ancestor. The vibrations between F and F sharp wave an invitation. Tremolos whisper desire, not dispute, and every pitch shares a bit of itself with its neighbor, like electrons swapped during the intimacies of physics. Even when scales cannot reconcile themselves geometrically, we can choose to hear them together. We can transpose the culture of sound, make room for the diminished and the supertonic. These connections yearn to be made, even if our ears resist. How much of ourselves do we leave with each other, taking the same seat on a bench, or grabbing the same spot on a handrail to pull our weight upstairs? We share the breeze, the noise it carries. The space between us, never empty, is full of us. Another Coltrane. I was looking at his handwritten score for Love Supreme, and I expected to see notes. There's only about a half dozen notes on his score for Love Supreme, which I think is about 18, it's parts of an 18-minute part. He only gave his band 6 notes. The rest of it is just handwritten notes on faith and the divine. And I realized after staring at it that it was a prayer. It wasn't a score. And that's where this poem came from. It's called Prayer Does Not Have To. Prayer does not have to whisper with reverence while clouds thicken to purple in the sky. It can percolate, chortle, and climb like Coltrane's horn in a love supreme, probing in fits and squawks, clearing a path upwards, then knocking over all stones until there is no right of way, no safe passage, nothing but timpani and bass drowning all hope and distance. I've been in that room where it's clear the storm is on its way, where light diminishes its chord until harmonies fall off each other, breathless. Let the thunder have its say. Open a door to the sizzling wind. Trust the score to give each note space, each need voice, until the whole room vibrates in halftones, raises itself into the sky. This loud song can find a stable key. This kind of noise can beg light down with a cymbals roll. Thank you. I close with this one again for my daughter, who, if she were here, would tell you it's both true and accurate. So I don't often get that double stamp of approval from her. I can get one or the other, but this one she would tell you. It's called Summer Botany Lesson. No matter how many blossoms I point out exploding overhead on a neighborhood walk, my daughter isn't buying it. She's in love with the sound of bougainvillea, thinks the word's so pretty, there's no way it stands for something real. She believes I made it up, strung long vowels and kissy soft consonants on a strand of rhythm to make her giggle. I wish I could tell a story that would win her faith, but learn to let it lie. Some truths beg for a fight. Some would rather echo on branches in crooked light while you just walk off holding hands. Thank you. I was about to run, but I heard that there was a question. Am I supposed to open for questions and answers? Yeah. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm also happy to sit down.
Well, this is going to be just started. What got you started?
Writing, or started with?
Writing stories.
I took a creative writing class my last semester in college because it was at 11 o'clock. And I'd only been taught the Romantics. So my teachers taught me Blake and Coleridge and Wordsworth, and I was a philosophy major. So I was learning big thoughts, but coming from Houma, it was like my brain was Teflon and the big thoughts were fried eggs. So I kept trying to spill in that class those thoughts, those eggs down onto the plate of William Blake. And it was awful. And my teacher was really nice. He was a kind man at heart. He called me out in the hall so none of the other students would hear, and he said, "Everything you're doing is bad. Everybody you think is a poet has been dead." And I'll never forget "been" as a helping verb. Been dead. I don't know what, I've taken a lot of grammar and I don't quite know what tense that's in. But he was right. Everybody had been dead. And he handed me a book by a Texas poet, R.S. Gwynn, who's a formalist. So he knew that I would recognize it as poetry because I'd only read that kind of stiff formal poetry. So he knew I'd recognize it. But Gwynn's poems were all about eating barbecue and going to movies with his parents and playing football in the yard. And as soon as I read those poems, I thought, well, I don't have any William Blake poems in me, but I've got a ton of food and family poems. And I started writing that weekend, and I haven't stopped. So.
There'll be an opportunity because you're going to have an opportunity to do a book signing. So there'll be an opportunity to talk to you.
Well, thank you all again. Thank you very much.
Let's hear it for Jack Bedell, poet laureate. All of our featured authors will, we have books, great display over there, and they'll be more than happy to talk to you after the festivities and maybe tell you whatever questions you have, answer whatever questions you have. So just a couple of things before we move on. Let me get them real quick. These are the flyers. So, Sheree. So my lovely wife, Sheree here, who's also the photographer, can pass them out if you need any flyers. Of course, it talks about tonight, but it also gives you a full disclosure of what the events that are going to take place tomorrow and when they're going to take place and where. So, so you have all that information. You can also tell friends to go to our website, festivalwars.org, and our Facebook page, Festival Wars 2018. And again, a thank you to all of our sponsors. I'll get to that in a little bit, but I'd like to move on. Next author that we have is Cornelius Edie. I wanted to say Eddie, but Edie has been permeated in my mind.
We had that conversation yesterday, like the day before that.
We did.
Yeah.
Edie.
But it's actually Ladie Hubbard next.
Okay, so Ladie Hubbard is next. So Cornelius, you just have to wait, my man. So Ladie Hubbard is next. So I would like, I'm not going to say the whole name. I would like Ty to come back up and introduce Ladie Hubbard.
Ladie Hubbard was born in Massachusetts, raised in Florida and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and currently lives in New Orleans with her husband and 3 children. She won the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence and her debut novel, The Talented Ripkins. Recently, she also received the Hudson Wright Foundation Legacy Award for debut fiction. Please help me welcome Ladie Hubbard.
Hi. Okay, it's actually Lady. It's pronounced Lady. And everybody calls me Ladie or Lade, but it's actually Lady, so it's fine. I'm used to it. I'm totally used to it. Well, I'm really happy to be here. It's been really great. I got to go into a school and give a workshop this morning as well, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm just going to read from this novel, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's I live in New Orleans. I lived in New Orleans for like 13 years now, but when this book is really inspired by, I spent my childhood summers in St. Petersburg, Florida with my grandparents every single year from when I was an infant. Actually, they took care of me in the summers. So this is, I was talking today actually about how, you can do anything you want with your imagination because they're almost unrecognizable in the book, except to me. But this is really about my grandfather and myself. So I don't know what he would think of what I have done with his personality, because he's actually a chemistry professor, and here he's a totally different person. But the book is about a family in Florida, an African-American family, and every member of the family is born with a different talent. So one can see in the dark, one can scale any wall, one can catch anything that's thrown at her. And the main character can make perfect maps of any landscape he drives through, Johnny Ripkins. Well, you know what? I was just going to read the, I'll say one other thing, because just in terms of the title, because it was originally called The Talented 10th, and it's actually based on Well, there's an essay by W.E.B. Du Bois called The Talented Tenth that's about education and providing educational opportunities to African Americans in the South, and that was written in 1903. So it's not really an enactment of his theories, it's sort of like a reflection on it and sort of the idea of a black middle class as like a leadership class. So anyway, again, that may not be immediately apparent either from what I'm going to read from here, but I was just going to read from the first chapter, which is called The Last Woman. He only came back because Melvin said he would kill him if he didn't pay off his debt by the end of the week. It was why he left St. Augustine, why he had no choice but to drive down to Lehigh Acres and dig up the box of money he'd buried in his brother's yard 14 years before. The only complication was his brother's last woman, who was still living in the house, because of course he didn't want her knowing what he was after. So he made something up. A toolbox, Johnny Ribkins said, standing on the splintered porch of a wood-framed two-story while hard slats of Florida sunshine bore down on his back and the woman squinted from behind the screened door. A toolbox, she said, gray grates masking her face like a veil. Why you got a toolbox buried in the yard? Oh, it's always been there, ever since we tore down the shed to build the basketball court. He nodded towards a weed-covered rectangle of cracked cement at the far corner of the yard. Just seemed like the safest place to put it at the time. A truck came barreling down the interstate on the other side of the fence, roar of exhaust merging with the mechanical drone of laughter coming from a TV playing inside the house. Johnny removed his hat, swatted at the moisture pooling across his brow, and stared at a rose tattoo that wound around the woman's neck. He hadn't seen her since his brother's funeral, but he had to admit she looked less crazy than he remembered. The lace top, mini skirt, and thigh-high boots were gone, replaced by a t-shirt, sweatpants, and white flip-flops. Her once gaunt cheekbones were now fleshy and jowly, and her hair, deprived of the bright red wig she'd worn to the wake, was cut short and gray. He figured she must have been in her 40s, about the same age his brother Franklin had been when he died. Johnny smiled. They're old tools, see? Like for turning screws so old they don't even make them anymore. Truth is, I all but forgot about them until a couple weeks ago when I got a delivery of antique watches at the shop. He pulled a handkerchief from the pocket of his shirt and scratched at a line of sweat tickling his left ear. It was hot out there, and he could hear how lazy and exhausted his lies sounded. Luckily, the woman was none too bright. They valuable? Only if you're a broken watch. A hearty amen and the sound of applause came from the TV inside the house. Tools aren't valuable, the watches are, but only if they're fixed. And really, it's more a matter of the fact that they don't make them anymore. Now, I've looked everywhere, even tried contacting the original manufacturer to see if I could get a hold of the designs to have copies made. And where was this going? Why was he wasting time trying to explain himself to some raggedy piece of interloping woman who didn't even have sense enough to invite him inside and out of the heat, which would have been simple courtesy? He didn't have time for this. He needed to find that money, get back to St. Augustine, and... So what, Johnny, you some kind of junk man now? Ain't no fucking junk man. It just popped out. But when he looked up, she was smiling. Her lip curled back to reveal the gold filling etched against her left incisor. I just thought because of the watches. You said they were old. They're antiques. He reached for his wallet. His hands were shaking as he pulled back the screen door and handed her his business card. Jonathan Ribkins, Acquisitions and Repairs, Ribkins Antiques. Family business, 2 generations. Didn't Franklin ever mention it? He worked with me for almost 12 years. No, we never discussed such things. She looked down at the card and then back at him. For a moment, he thought he saw something crafty in her eyes, a form of coherency that hadn't been there when he met her all those years ago, else he would have remembered it. Then the TV let out another amen, and he decided she must have found Jesus and gotten off the crack. She handed him back the card. You sure that's all you want? That's all. She sighed. All you Ribkins are so peculiar, she said, then stopped because there wasn't much more to say. She shuffled down the dark hall. He waited until she was in the living room, then positioned himself at the center of the bottom step and started walking straight ahead towards the interstate. And as he walked, he couldn't help but think about how sad it was to be digging through his brother's yard again after all that time. His half-brother, some 20 years his junior, whose existence he hadn't even known about until he was a grown man, when their father got drunk at a party one night and confessed there was another son, someone named Franklin, living with his mama, and Johnny had been the one to go find him. He thought about all he'd been through since Franklin died, how hard he tried to put this place behind him, only to find himself at the age of 72, right back where he started. This was especially troubling because Johnny made maps. That was his talent, not just what he did, but who he was, same way his brother had scaled walls. Johnny made maps and Franklin scaled walls, and for 12 years they'd made their living by selling the things they found on the other side of those walls, right there in the antique shop Johnny inherited from their father. When he'd gone 20 paces, he cocked his head to the left and started moving diagonally toward a large oak tree at the far corner of the yard. All of that was supposed to have ended the day his brother died. He'd made a promise to stop stealing, start living right, start doing right, try to remember what it meant to be a decent man. And everything seemed to be going according to plan until one day he looked up and realized that somehow in his grief, he'd wound up working for a man under the mistaken impression that he owned Johnny. So here he was, 14 years later, crouched in the dirt trying to dig up enough money to appease a criminal. He walked another 10 paces, then stopped and stared down at a small patch of dirt and clover. "You gonna fill it back up?" the woman called from the living room window. "I mean, when you're finished." "Of course," Johnny smiled. He was still smiling as she disappeared back into the shadows of a house built for someone else entirely. He hoisted his shovel. He needed the money. That was all there was to it, and there really wasn't any point worrying about the how and the why of it now. But it was also true that he'd buried that box for a reason and was breaking a vow he'd made to himself by digging it up. And that, in some ways, was just as troubling as Melvin's threats. Because if all he tried to do since his brother left him hadn't been leading any place but right back here, then what was the point? And if he couldn't answer that question, couldn't make sense of his own path or justify his existence even to himself, then what was he doing crouched in the dirt, humiliating himself just to hold on? He put down his shovel and stared at an empty hole, aware that something didn't feel right. He had a near photographic memory, but he'd also stood on every inch of that yard, watched it from every conceivable angle, making it difficult to recall with any precision where exactly he'd stood when he first dug the hole he was looking for now. "Why are you digging up that tree, old man?" A heavy-set, big-eyed girl in a red t-shirt and blue jean leggings was watching him from the other side of the fence. "What do you want?" "I don't want nothing." He reached into his pocket, grabbed a handful of coins, fished out the shiniest, and tossed it over the fence. The girl caught it with her left hand. "Now go on home." "I am home," the girl said. She pushed through the gate, walked up the front steps, and passed through the screen door. Johnny shook his head and wondered yet again why his brother's last woman had to be such a trifling mess. "Of course she's your brother's child. Doesn't she look just like him?" He was in the house now, standing in the dark hall while the woman stood in front of him with her arms folded in front of her chest. The girl sat in the living room watching TV. "Why didn't you say something?" "Say what?" the woman said. "This is the first time I've seen you in 14 years. How was I supposed to even find you? And anyhow, why? I don't need anything from you, Johnny Ribkins." Johnny looked at the girl slumped on the couch with her feet up on a rickety coffee table, surrounded by huge piles of junk. The whole house was jammed with drab furniture dragged in from who knows where. But worse than the things he didn't recognize were the things he did. The couch pushed against the far wall, his drafting table shoved in a corner underneath the TV set, the lamp with the crooked shade sitting on the floor near the window, all tokens of a distant past he'd all but forgotten, yet somehow knew were completely out of order. You're still living in my brother's house. This rat trap, in the middle of nowhere, I can't even sell it. He felt something tense in his chest and glanced towards the yard. Listen here, woman, you've got no right to be selling anything. The name is Meredith, old man, and I've already told you I can't. But speaking of rights, she turned to her daughter. Honey, why don't you go upstairs for a minute and start packing? I'm not going anywhere. Well, go upstairs anyway. Let me talk to your uncle. The girl sucked her teeth and stomped out of the room. Are you heading somewhere? Why? I'm just asking. Yeah? She narrowed her eyes. Look, man, you might as well go ahead and tell me what your intentions are, because this is a common law state. You know what that means? He did. He stared at the crooked lampshade. It means I got the same legal rights as a proper wife, understand? Now, I don't want any trouble from you, but I've been living out here for going on 14 years now, so I will tell you just like I told the bank. Whatever the claim to this place you might think you have, you can just forget about. This is my house, and it was the heat of her presence, worse than the heat outside. He could feel his breathing catch in his throat and his blood pressure rise, even as he told himself to keep cool and remember why he was there. Melvin had given him just 1 week to come up with $100,000 he needed to pay off his debt. And part of him knew that the only reason he'd been given that much time was because Melvin didn't believe he could do it, was just waiting for him to fail. But that was because Melvin didn't know about the hole Johnny had dug, which was to say how selfish he'd been before his brother died. I just want my tools, Johnny cried, then stopped because he could feel himself about to give away how badly he wanted them. He reached for the handkerchief in his pants pocket, put his head down and patted his brow, trying to channel the appearance of a harmless old man who was confused or anyhow peculiar enough to have come all that way to fetch some worthless junk. And all at once it occurred to him that maybe he was just a harmless, peculiar old man, hunched over, blinking black confusion and grief as he stood in the dark hall of a house he'd helped his brother build.